All right. Hey, we're on. Check it out, y'all. It's the Future Freedom. I'm Scott Horton here every Thursday night. Well, mostly when it ain't Thanksgiving and stuff. Thursday nights here on Liberty.me with the great Jacob Hornberger, founder and president of the Future Freedom Foundation. How you doing tonight, Bumper?
Good, Scott. Sorry about the delay. I apologize. I was having big computer problems, and I apologize to all the listeners. I just couldn't figure out what it is, but all of a sudden it started working.
I thought it was me. But oh well. Yeah, no, these things happen.
Sorry for the delay.
Yeah. So, I don't know if anybody knows to hit refresh. I need to get logged into the chat room here. I should have been doing that while you were screwing around with the computer on your end. But I'll log into the chat room and let everybody know that the show has started.
We may not have anybody since we're starting 15 minutes late.
Yeah, they may have all buzzed off by now, but I guess we'll see. Every program, every computer I got won't do a damn thing until it updates tonight. We're just going to have to wait around. But anyway, I'll go ahead and get it started because, hey, people are going to, hey, there's 3 viewers right there. And plus people are going to see this on the rerun too. So I wanted to get you started off here. I'll work on technical details in a minute. But I want to start you off with this quote from Barack Obama talking about the Russians, which I was really surprised. I mean, I know Obama and Putin don't like each other and that kind of thing, but our Putin, Obama said about Vladimir Putin, the Russians now have been there in Syria for several weeks, over a month. And I think fair-minded reporters who have looked at the situation would say that the situation hasn't changed significantly. In the interim, Russia has lost a commercial passenger jet. You've seen another jet shot down. There have been losses in terms of Russian personnel, which is he referring to the guy getting his head cut off yesterday? Is that what he's talking about? And I think Mr. Putin understands that with Afghanistan fresh in the memory, for him to simply get bogged down in an inconclusive and paralyzing civil conflict is not the outcome that he's looking for. And now, if it was just me, I wouldn't know where to begin with all the important truths and all the screaming falsehoods in that statement. But first of all, I guess I wonder what you think of Barack Obama mocking the Russians for being victims of terrorist attacks and his ridiculous double standard in refusing to acknowledge that American foreign policy has anything to do with attacks against us when he's willing to gloat about it when it comes to the damn Russians.
Well, he certainly should know a lot about quagmires because the United States history of interventionism in the post-World War II era is a history of quagmires. We've got Vietnam, where the United States got bogged down there. We've got now Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, the Middle East. I mean, it's really funny that he's sitting here saying, well, the Russians are going to get bogged down in a quagmire. Well, yeah, he ought to know about it firsthand. I mean, this is the whole history of the interventionist state. And notice that he criticizes Russia for intervening. You see, it's only the U.S. empire that has the authority to intervene in foreign affairs. Other countries are not supposed to do this without the permission of the world's empire. So there's a lot of hypocrisy here. I mean, after the end of the Cold War, they expected Russia to get down on its knee and kiss the ring and say, okay, we will be like Britain. We will be like France. We will do whatever you tell us to do. We will be your poodle. The Russians aren't like that. They never were going to do that. And so now we've got this very dangerous situation where they're one-upping each other, and Turkey shoots a Russian plane out of the sky, and the United States insists their backs Turkey, and we've got the NATO agreement to come to Turkey's defense in case there's a war between Turkey and Russia. I mean, now we're really seeing the insanity of NATO and the whole Cold War, and it's getting more dangerous, Scott.
Man, and the fact that he's going to sit there and invoke Afghanistan, we all know what happened when Russia got bogged down in Afghanistan. While he's been presiding over being bogged down in Afghanistan for his entire presidency, and where he did the massive surge, which completely failed to do anything but extend the war for another few years, another many years. And he's going to sit there and mock them It's really incredible to me. And we're talking about Obama, not Bush. I think Bush actually probably would have been more respectful on that kind of, on that sort of level. He calls him Putin instead of even President Putin and that kind of thing. It's, I don't know. I don't remember, the Reagan years, they were still the real bad guys, the USSR. And I don't remember Reagan talking about them, personally insulting the leadership on that kind of level. They're supposed to be statesmen and all that crap, right?
Yeah, I think it's sort of like the wound. Yeah, it's like the wounded animal. I mean, the empire really, it has this perception of strength, but it's really weak. You've got, with the out of control spending, government debt expanding. I mean, what's the empire going to do now? It desperately needs money, as does the welfare state. And so their temptation is to start lashing out against what they call the rivals. This is standard imperial conduct, that a rival surfaces instead of just some other country. Russia is now a rival. And notice that a lot of the media are now saying the Cold War never ended. It's really just resurfaced again. And then you've got pivoting to China because we've got to check China's assertiveness. And then you've got the gamesmanship, if you say, by calling people by their last names instead of by their title. It's all gamesmanship that really is associated with empire. You mentioned the quagmire in Afghanistan. Look at Iraq. I mean, they're actually sending troops back into Iraq. There's no declaration of war. I mean, there's no authorization from Congress. This is the imperial presidency, along with the national security state. We want to send troops into a country, we'll send troops into a country. We want to bomb people in that country, we'll bomb them. We don't need any stinking authorization from Congress. We don't need a congressional declaration of war. Who needs the Constitution?
Yep. All right. Now I am the one with the audio problem. Stay right there. Go ahead, take it from there. Jacob, say something else great, and I'll be right back.
Yeah, because we're getting a lot of scratchy stuff on you. Your voice is coming across real scratchy. But yeah, I mean, the whole history of U.S. interventionism is hypocrisy, and it's dangerous, and it's not in the interest of the United States, not in the interest of the American people. And this is the big debate we need to be having. And unfortunately, we are not having it on the political scene. We're having ridiculous things like Trump's raising the issues he's raising to build a wall and so forth. The real fundamental issues that have to be addressed in this country. Should we have an interventionist foreign policy? Should we have an imperialist foreign policy? Is this the root cause of the terrorism? Remember when they said, we're going to go bomb people overseas so we can kill them before they get over here? Well, then how come everybody's so scared of a terrorist attack? I mean, they've been bombing people for 14 years. And yet Americans are more scared than ever that somebody's going to come over here and do something bad to them. Well, how's that possible if they've been bombing and killing people for 14 years? If they haven't killed and bombed the people before they got over here in 14 years, that's a pretty good sign that they have failed. Yeah. And really, that what they've done is they've created a racket where the more people they kill, the more people they anger, the more people that are ready to come and do something bad to Americans. And so the solution is not to keep pouring fuel on the fire. The solution is to bring the troops home from everywhere, discharge them in the imperialism and in the interventionism, and then the terrorism goes away.
All right. Now, first of all, is my audio fixed here?
Yeah, that's much better. It was real scratchy.
And then let me know if there's an echo. Somebody said there was an echo too. I don't know. It's one of those nights here on the show. But anyway, so, what I was going to say was, I have a friend and he knows better. He's known all along. And yet he said to me last night, I don't know, man. I think maybe we are just going to have to kill all of them and whatever, because they just won't stop. And I says to him, I know that that's a bunch of crap. And that H.W. Bush and Bill Clinton and George W. Bush and Barack Obama got us into this mess. Every one of their policies did this. It's not Islam, it's empire. And you already know that that's true. And I see that you're frustrated that, there's been this mass shooting and the guy's, an Arab, and apparently, it seems like he had some, at least the way he carried it out was jihadi style. I don't know exactly what his problem was. But point being that, people are frustrated. They know that their government you know, it's not like we tried nothing and we're all out of ideas. We tried all the wrong things for a generation and a half straight. But you know what? Maybe we're just going to have to go ahead and nuke them all until they're all dead, because now look at what a horrible problem our government has created for us. There's no end in sight. And what are we going to do? Just suffer mass shootings at the hands of crazy Arabs all the time or whatever? So somebody's just got to do something. And this is somebody who knows better. This is somebody who's known all along, but is still just so sick of this. He's kind of willing to hear any answer that will mean a quick end to the damn terror war, one way or the other. You know what I mean?
I know exactly what you mean, because I see it too. And I saw it in the 90s. This was the same exasperation with Saddam Hussein. When you hear the stuff about Muslims and the stuff about ISIS, I heard it all throughout the 90s. Saddam Hussein. And there was all this exasperation with Saddam Hussein. We need to just go take him out. The WMDs are coming to get us and stuff. And you see the same thing. And I've been predicting it. I mean, I kept telling people ever since 9/11, I can point to my article saying, look, you're going to see another terrorist attack on American soil. Now, whether this thing in California is or isn't, the fact is you're going to see more. And this is what I've been telling people. Don't be shocked. You know, what shocked me was the people in Paris were shocked. Don't be shocked. When the French government goes into Syria and starts bombing people, you're going to have terrorism in retaliation. That's why we got 9/11. So I'm telling people, you don't need to be shocked. And the other thing I kept telling people in my articles over the years is, look, when the crisis comes, rational thinking is in very short supply because people panic. I mean, you see even libertarians calling for bigger police state reaction in terms of this California thing, that we need stricter immigration controls. We need more control, the leftists say. And in other words, more of big government, instead of saying, look, big government is the cause of this problem. They don't want to address that. Yeah. Notice that everyone is calling for stricter immigration controls, more police state activity, more gun control. They will not look at the national security state, what the troops are doing in Syria, what the troops are doing in Iraq, what the troops are doing in Afghanistan. This is their God. This is their idol. And all we can do, Scott, is keep repeating, this is the cause of your problems. That more of the same and expecting different results doesn't make any sense at all. What you have to do if you want different results is change your course. And you pull out a weed by its root. You bring all the troops home from the Middle East. It doesn't make one bit of difference whether ISIS ends up controlling Iraq, Syria, Afghanistan, or Timbuktu. It doesn't make any difference at all. They are
actually down in Timbuktu right now.
Okay.
As a consequence of the war in Libya.
And notice that it's U.S. interventionism that gave rise to ISIS. I mean, it's just so incredible that people don't want to confront that this is their own government that created the conditions that led to now the problem that everybody's scared of. There's only one solution to this. Bring the troops home. Just leave them alone. These are the former colonies of France and Britain, and they don't like being colonized again. They don't like being dictated to. Leave them alone. Why? It's called laissez-faire. Let it be. Just leave them alone. But Americans, I don't get it. Well, that's conservatism. They're always looking for excuses for big government, and crises are that big excuse. They always have been, Scott.
Yeah. Well, I thought it's just a sign of the times. Trump, it's not just good enough that we have an outright fascist running for president, but he's sort of like the ridiculous clown show fascist too, where it's just all a self-parody in real time, the first time as it happens kind of thing. And so, sorry, my point is here Trump is retweeting. Someone tweeted, yeah, Donald Trump's poll numbers jump every time something terrible like this happens. And he retweets it like, yeah, that's right. And then the next one is, another retweet of Donald Trump's is, the more frightening the world is, the more safe we feel with President Trump. Right? And that's not because he sounds a little bit non-interventionist sometimes. It's because when he sounds like a militarist and a hawk, he says, I'm going to go in there and kill them all. I'm going to get Patton to go in there and wipe them out. And then we're going to take all their oil and we're going to starve them to death till they're all dead. And that's what makes them feel safe, because they're pretty sure that no one will ever want to be a terrorist against us again after he's done with all that, you know.
Hey, well, let me remind you that if there's still people here, I know we started 50 minutes late.
Yeah, no, there's. I was just going to say too. Sorry, thanks for interrupting me. I got a phone number here. If you guys want to ask questions, I saw one question in the chat room earlier, or something that could be made into a question anyway. Anybody in the chat room? If you want to ask a question to Jacob Hornberger, do that. Otherwise, also, I'm typing in now the phone number if you guys want to call in.
But it's also questions to you, Scott.
Yeah, no, I mean, you'll be able to hear them. We'll both be able to hear them if,
people are free to ask you questions. People are free to ask you questions too.
They're free.
You know a lot more of this than I do.
Well, whatever. Everybody knows what I got to say about every damn thing, but anyway, so you can ask Hornberger about the warfare state, the welfare state, the regulatory state, the national security state, the killing of Jack Kennedy, whatever you like, Middle East policy. And he's right. You got to recognize, you go to fff.org, and there's literally the entire post-Cold War era of anti-American foreign policy essays there for you, all archived from approximately 1989 on, right? From the from the fall of the wall through right now. The Future Freedom Foundation has been kicking ass and right about this the entire time. Okay,
and
so this was the question
we've been saying. Yeah,
this was the question I was referring to earlier. If anybody else wants to ask something, please ask it. The guest says, perhaps the U.S. is trying to lure Russia into a Syrian quagmire like they lure the USSR into an Afghan one. What say you two? I'll let you go first.
Yeah, that's a fantastic point. And what he's alluding to is what the U.S. did to the Soviet Union. I forget the exact circumstances, and you can elucidate on them, Scott. But it was really the U.S. that sucked the Soviets into invading Afghanistan. And I forget exactly how they did that, but it was really a setup. And when it happened, I think it was Brzezinski, that U.S. official, I forget what his exact title was, Zbigniew Brzezinski says, "Oh well, now this is great. We're gonna give them their own Vietnam." Now, how much more morally bankrupt can you have than that? That we've given them their own Vietnam, which means a lot of regular soldiers are going to be dying. A lot of Afghan people are going to be dying and trying to oust the Soviets from there. I mean, who could be gloating over something like that? But here's the other interesting twist to this, is that when they said to Brzezinski, look, aren't you going to be supporting radical jihadists here, extremist Muslims, and the people that are going to be trying to oust the Soviets from there? And Brzezinski says something to the effect of, who cares about some jihadists when we're dealing with communism here? Now, that's an important lesson, because that's exactly what the mindset of conservatives was during the entire Cold War. You never heard them talking about the centuries-long war against Islam. You never heard them talking about the Quran or Muslims or this caliphate threat. You never heard any of that. In fact, they were gleeful that the U.S. government was partnering with these radical jihadists, because the sole bugaboo at that time and the boogeyman was communism and the Soviet Union, and that was what was driving the official, rise of the national security state, the whole Cold War. So it wouldn't surprise me if that's what they're doing in Syria. You can see NATO doing this. NATO intentionally provoking Russia by absorbing all the Eastern Bloc countries all the way up to Russia's borders. And now they just announced that they're going to incorporate Montenegro, which has infuriated the Russians, because they can see this encirclement. And that's one thing that the Russians historically have always feared, is encirclement. I mean, they have this paranoid view, and the U.S. knows this. The Pentagon knows it. The CIA knows it. And despite that, or maybe because of it, they keep provoking them and provoking and provoking them. And as I wrote in an article recently, I said, let's keep in mind that during the Cold War, and especially during the 1960s, during the Kennedy administration, the attitude of the national security establishment was they wanted nuclear war. They felt that we could defeat the Russians, that they might get some missiles across and destroy a few American cities, but that we would come out the winner in terms of population. And so I wouldn't discount the possibility that some of their successors have that same mindset. And this is why I keep saying, Scott, over and over again, the root cause of this is this totalitarian-like, Soviet-like apparatus called the national security apparatus. We really need to get that dismantled before it takes this country down.
All right, so my answer to the question is this. It never occurred to me until the Russians went into Syria. As soon as they did, I thought, wait a minute. Because that's always the question. Stupidity or the plan. American foreign policy is so asinine, and yet it's always very successful at creating more crises to go and fail to solve, and on we go kind of thing. So I'm always asking, you know, who stands to benefit from this folly? Is it truly a folly, or they're really screwing up this bad for, you know, an ulterior motive, that kind of thing? And so as soon as the Russians went into Syria, I thought, well, now maybe that makes sense. Why is Obama backing Al-Qaeda in Syria for the last 4 years? What could possibly explain that? Well, maybe luring the Russians in to give them their own Vietnam again is just like they did the last time, supporting the Mujahideen in order to lure them into Afghanistan back in the 80s. Maybe that is the answer. Maybe that makes sense. And then I bounced that off of the heads of a couple of guests on the show, some kind of foreign policy experts who thought, well, you know, I don't know, that sounds like a little too convenient of a rationalization after the fact. And I don't really think that's what they were doing in the first place. But then Robert Gates told the Senate, Obama's former Secretary of Defense, his Republican Secretary of Defense that he inherited from Bush, the guy who tried to stop the Libya war but didn't resign over it. But anyway, he told the Senate that he disagreed. He thought Obama, the context was he thought Obama needed to do something harsh to the Russians to tell them to get the hell out right now. And he was, which is insane. But anyway, that was his point. But then he said, as opposed to that, what Obama seems to have decided was that he wants to see if he can just bog the Russians down and, you know, give them a quagmire type of situation. So when Robert Gates said that that was his impression of what he thinks Obama's doing, at least now since the Russians have invaded, if not to provoke them in the first place, then I think that's something that we all need to really take a careful look at. I mean, geez, just because Israel hates Assad, is that it? Maybe to lure Russia in, to get the Russians to draw red lines, saying, you know, if Damascus is really under threat, then we're going to intervene, and then to get them to do it, to bog them down and bankrupt us, you know, or bog them down and bankrupt them, I meant to say. I'm used to talking about us being bogged down and bankrupted, sorry, but it does make sense. I hate to give them any credit for doing something evil and smart instead of evil and stupid, but I think it's possible.
Well, they always know that they thrive off crises. That's what's the fear and crises are the coin of the realm. And that's the only way they can keep Americans all riled up, whether it's a terrorist crisis or a foreign policy crisis. And they had to know that when they engaged in this regime change operation against Assad, that Assad was aligned with Russia, has long been aligned with Russia, that Russia was very likely to react to this. I mean, when you go out and try to oust empires or other nations' dictators, they don't like it. And so they had to realize that Russia was going to respond in some way. And so, yeah, all of a sudden they might see an opportunity for a repeat of the Cold War. I mean, remember what conservatives used to say, that we won the Cold War because we forced the Soviets to spend themselves into bankruptcy. And so you've got a situation now where Russia is now engaged in this not really a quagmire, it could be a quagmire, where they're spending a lot of money the same way the U.S. empire is spending a lot of money. So maybe it's a race to see which nation's going to bankrupt first. And they already did it once to the Soviet Union, and maybe they figure they can do it twice to Russia this time.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Hey, chat room guys, any more questions for Jacob Hornberger? Central banking war.
While they're thinking, let me address your thing about Trump, because I think that's really interesting. Because I think Trump really goes to show the whole bankruptcy of where the Republican Party and the conservative movement has arrived. Because, you know, there's no philosophical standard of conservatism anymore. I mean, they all believe in just, you know, they believe in the welfare state. They believe in the warfare state. They believe in statism. They still preach the old mantras of free enterprise, private property, and limited government. And you see that in their stationery and on their websites and stuff. But in terms of philosophy, they are statist to the core. They believe in Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, public schooling, the whole works, and the whole shebang. So their policies and their philosophies are really just ad hoc. Hey, well, let's invade this country. Well, let's not invade that country. There's no philosophical underpinning at all. And so here a guy like Trump comes along who's nothing but a collection of hodgepodge ad hoc decisions. I mean, there is no philosophical underpinning to at all. And he's their standard bearer. I mean, really, I think it is so amusing and so ironic and so entertaining, because now the Republicans don't know what to do. They're scared to death to attack him. The New York Times had an article that said all the Republicans are scared to attack him, including the big money people, because he'll lash out at them. And they're scared of getting lashing out from Donald Trump. So it really is amusing. It's providing me with a lot of entertainment.
Yeah. Well, you know, this is what I've been saying. I guess I had a more positive spin on it back in 2007 or whatever, but I was trying to say that, look, the entire right in America has absolutely no intellectual leadership whatsoever, other than maybe Rush Limbaugh and Ron Paul. None of the rest of them know anything about anything. And Newt Gingrich says profoundly and fundamentally a lot, as Sheldon points out, but he doesn't actually ever say anything fundamental or profound at all. He just says fundamental and profound. That's all. And so they have nobody leading them. And my spin on it back then was great, because Ron Paul is filling a huge leadership vacuum here on the right. You guys need a coherent set of things to believe, let me tell you. And there's nobody better at spinning libertarianism as some form of true conservatism than Ron Paul, right? But the thing is he got old and retired, and he moved the ball far, but he had to quit. You know, he couldn't keep running for president forever or whatever. He's 80 years old now, or 81. Yeah, 80 years old. So there's just, you know, there's nobody there. They don't have anything. And like you're saying, even their leader, at least he represents anger at the status quo. But yeah, like you're saying, he has no actual set of beliefs whatsoever, right? Like, he's not a George W. Bush conservative. He's not any kind of conservative. He's not any kind of anything. He makes up his position on any given subject as he's saying it. You know, just whatever he feels like today. He doesn't even have a need to be consistent about anything, to have a principle that he would ever need to apply any question against or anything like that. And so, yeah, you're right. I mean, and then, like you're saying, the rest of them, they're afraid to attack him because why? Because he'll bully the hell out of them and win because they got nothing. Because they're just as horrible as him on virtually everything. And they don't have the wherewithal to stand up for their horrible positions. Because, you know, like Rubio, he's just mouthing talking points he learned from the neocons. He doesn't actually know anything. So when it comes to the fight, the bully's going to take his lunch money, win every time. And so you're right. Like, they're just helpless. They're sitting with their hands in their pockets, hoping he doesn't pick on them next. And it's terrible to see America descend into a fascist dictatorship in such a comical way. But then again, it's kind of deserved in its multiple ironicals.
Yeah, well, it really reflects the moral degeneracy of the whole Republican Party and the conservative movement. What's important is that the Libertarian movement. Okay, there's nobody up there.
Hey, wait, is my mic bad again? Here, let me restart. Go ahead.
Yeah, it's been bad for 10 minutes or so. Yeah, what's important is that the Libertarian movement just continue doing what we're doing, because all those libertarians that were out there with Ron Paul, they're still there. And the movement has expanded significantly since then. Now, we may not see direct evidence of that because there's no standard bearer out there to reflect libertarian values, but let the movement keep building. It may be off the radar screen, but it's building. And when the opportunity arises, we need to be able to step into that breach. What will be that opportunity? It's impossible to predict. We don't know what the opportunity will be. But the real tragedy would be that some opportunity arises where libertarians and libertarianism can really make some headway, and we're not prepared. And so we have to be prepared, even though we don't see the opportunity in the future. We have to just have faith that ideas have power, and that if we keep building our movement, keep drawing more people into our movement, that opportunity will present itself. And when it does, you're going to see a mass movement come to the surface, much as it did during the Ron Paul campaign. But it may not even be political. It may be through some other kind of thing that we can't even foresee. But what's important is keep getting ready for it. Keep studying, keep drawing people in, keep sharing articles, keep talking to people about how libertarianism is the key, the solution to America's woes, both on the foreign policy side and the domestic side with the drug war, the welfare state, and so forth.
Mm-hmm. All right, now this isn't fair to put you in this position, but this question is for you. Shouldn't I be supporting Rand Paul for president? Good luck.
Well, I think everybody's got to make that choice for himself. I mean, clearly Rand is better than the others in terms of...
Clearly? Really?
Yeah, he is. I mean, let's face it. He stands strongly against the NSA, makes speeches against the NSA, he stands for that aspect of privacy. That's better than any of the others.
Okay, that's one thing.
But I mean, let's face it. He's not Ron Paul. He's not a libertarian. I mean, I get fundraising letters from Rand saying, "Dear fellow conservative." Well, I'm not a conservative, but when he says, he's not saying dear conservative, he's saying dear fellow conservative. He's a conservative. I mean, so, I mean, what can you expect? He's not a libertarian. So, you know, he doesn't excite me. He doesn't get my juices going like his father did. I mean, I went to New Hampshire and campaigned door to door for Ron Paul. I mean, I was up there in the snow and going door to door. I wouldn't do that for Rand because he doesn't excite me. He doesn't get my juices going. And I think that's the big shame, is that he lost this strong libertarian base. But I'd be the last person in the world to say, hey, don't go support Rand Paul. If that's what somebody wants to do, be my guest. Yeah.
All right. Now, someone else asked, maybe we're being too hard on the conservatives, because there's a lot more than just one kind of conservative. And a lot of them, I don't know, a lot, some, he's saying, isn't it the case that many have reacted against the neoconservative hijacking of their movement and have moved much more, you know, much closer to a libertarian or conservatarian position? And, or is it really, nah, just too late, write them off?
Well, there's a few conservatives like that. I mean, that are doing great work. Certainly that's the case. Andrew Bacevich, I mean, he writes some great stuff. He's a conservative. He's not a libertarian. And there's others. American Conservative Magazine comes up with some great stuff. But I really consider these to be such a minority in the conservative movement. I think they're a positive minority, that they don't really define the conservative movement. It's really the neocons and the ad hocers, the ones that have no philosophy, that just say, hey, let's bomb this country, and hey, let's kill those people over there, and hey, let's have a drug war, and let's have a Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid, but let's preach private property and free markets. That's what defines the conservative movement. I know of very few conservatives that call for the dismantling of Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, the drug war. I mean, these are important features of tyranny, these kind of socialistic measures. So, yeah, the answer is that there's a few conservatives that are saying some good things on foreign policy, and I'm glad they're there. But they don't define the conservative movement at all. The conservative movement generally is just bankrupt.
Yeah, I'm afraid I agree with that too much. I'd be harsher than you on it. So now this one is for me. It's not so much a question. I'll try to answer it quickly instead of the long way. But he says he disagrees with me about the Arab Spring, that it was all a plot to overthrow the secular dictators in favor of chaos, and refers me to Theory Mesian. So the first thing I'll say is Theory Mesian Here's a story that Greg Palast told. Greg Palast, the investigative reporter, asked Thierry Messian, why did you make up that ridiculous crap about a missile hit the Pentagon instead of hijacked Flight 77? And Thierry Messian said, because I had to separate Americans, stupid Americans, from the money in their pockets that they might otherwise spend in ways harmful to themselves. Ha, 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 and had a drink of wine. So that's who Thierry Messian is a con artist and a hack who has written that General Cartwright was indicted, who's written nothing but crankery. I'd be amazed if he could even get published on InfoWars. It was complete nonsense. Show me one other source in the whole world says General Cartwright is being prosecuted. And give me a break. The guy is completely ridiculous. And I don't know how anyone would base anything they think off of what he says. Secondly, you must not have been alive in 2011 then, because what happened was the people of Tunisia and Egypt rose up and overthrew their American-backed sock puppet dictators. And the Americans did everything they could to prevent the overthrow of Mubarak in Egypt. And they did everything they could to work with the Saudis and the Israelis to overthrow the Muslim Brotherhood as fast as possible and reinstall a secular military dictator again. Okay, that's the history of that. They took advantage of and hijacked the Arab Spring in Libya and hijacked the Arab Spring in Syria. But that doesn't hardly have anything to do with the Arab Spring at all, other than the Americans saw an opportunity to carry out more of Israel's agenda against Iran's allies, Hezbollah and Assad. So the idea that, and then look what they did in Yemen. They did everything they could to keep Saleh as long as they could, and then they replaced him with his vice president Hadi as fast as they could. In Bahrain, they backed the Saudi tanks that went rolling in to crush the rebellion against the Sunni monarchy in Bahrain, and on and on. So, no, you're just wrong. If you read A Clean Break and you read a new Coping with Crumbling States and all the Israeli doctrine about smashing the Arab world, they're not talking about Egypt, where they're perfectly happy to have all of the leaders wear olive green with shiny medals and ribbons. What they're talking about is smashing Shiite power. That is Hezbollah and Syria backed by Iran. So, sorry, but try again. Strategy.
If I could echo,
I noticed much of a swing over the years in the national security state in the way that the presidents carry out their policies. I was asked this the other day, Jacob, about I guess by Tom Woods and Bob Murphy asked me, well, wasn't Bush they're quoting Krugman saying Obama is more or less status quo. Bush was an extremely horrible aberration of a president. Obama is basically no more or less imperialist than any other president. And, well, what's your reaction to that?
I think they're all cut out of the same mold. I think Obama's 8 years are just a continuation of the Bush years. They all believe in the same thing. Now you may have one that invades 3 countries and one that invades 2 countries and one that invades 1 country, one that tortures a little bit and one that tortures a lot, but they're all cut out of the same cloth. And the fact is that they have this huge apparatus at their disposal, the national security establishment, the big standing army, the CIA, the NSA, and to a certain extent, the FBI too. It's just this one really totalitarian-like apparatus. I know I've emphasized that in the past, that never existed in American history. So you could have in prior decades before the national security state, you could have an imperial-like president, but if he doesn't have the means to invade foreign countries, well, then he can't invade the foreign countries. So you're not going to have an interventionist foreign policy if you don't have a huge standing army and a CIA. You're not going to have coups and regime change operations. But yeah, they're all the same thing as far as I'm concerned.
I remember, Joseph Stromberg, the great writer for the Future Freedom Foundation, had an old piece for antiwar.com that was called "The Crazies That Preceded the Loonies." And it was all about how, of course, the Bush administration had been hijacked by Richard Pearl and Paul Wolfowitz and all these Likudnik ideological fanatics who had, 1, all bad agendas, and 2, no idea what they were doing or talking about. But Stromberg compared them to their fathers, basically, Norman Podhoretz and Irving Kristol and the earlier generation of neocons who had, made up all the nonsense about the Soviet Union and were behind the not just containment, but let's roll them back crowd during the Cold War days. So, you know, I hear stories where, like Ray McGovern says that Bush Sr. always called the neocons the crazies in the basement. And Brent Scowcroft's job was to keep them in the basement. They're allowed to kill, you know, El Salvadorans, but they're not allowed to mess around with Middle East policy, that kind of thing. And then Junior came and gave them all top jobs in the Pentagon, the State Department, the Vice President's office, and they lied us right into war with Iraq. So I'm going somewhere with this. So you would think that, there you go. So these guys are the crazies. These guys are as bad as it gets. Pearl and Wolfowitz are as bad as you can find at any think tank in all of DC. You give them total power. They make a horrible mistake like the Iraq War, or do something horrible like the Iraq War. I don't mean to call it a mistake like it was innocent or something, but they do something horrible like the Iraq War. But then they pass the baton back to the status quo, Barack Obama, the centrist Democrat. And what does he do? He does more for Al-Qaeda even than Bush. Bush gave him half of Iraq. Obama gave him Libya and Syria and created the Islamic State. He ought to be the one up there on the balcony instead of Baghdadi. So, you know, if Bush is the aberration, how do we explain Obama? Or is it just a slippery slope on the mad, you know, dash to hell, or what? I don't know, man.
Well, we also shouldn't discount the possibility that it's the national security establishment, the military and the CIA, that are in large part running the show here. That's the theme of Glennon's book, Double Government, that the real power center in the government, it has been the military, the Pentagon, and the CIA, and they sort of operate independently. They're in Virginia. They're not in DC like the rest of the departments and agencies, and they're sort of like a counterweight to the federal government. And Glennon's thesis, and a lot of people have argued this now and increasingly argue this, that this deep state of the national security establishment is where the real power is, and that all the others are sort of figureheads, the judiciary, the president, the Congress, that create the facade that the government still operates like it did before the establishment of the national security state. But in fact, it's the Pentagon and the CIA that are really running the show here.
Yep. All right. So let's see. We got no calls. We did get quite a few questions. Anybody have any more questions for Jacob here? I just want to point out, because I didn't get a chance to talk about it on the radio show today, that Al-Qaeda has taken 2 towns in southern Yemen because America's flying as their Air Force right now. And people keep calling it the Saudi war on Yemen, but it's America's war on Yemen. It's American spies and soldiers and sailors picking their targets and refueling their jets and equipping them, sending them resupplies of weapons. This is the USA's war against the poorest country in the Middle East. And that's only because East Africa doesn't count. Obama's already done killing 500,000 people in Somalia, I guess. So now he's on to Yemen, and nobody even cares or is paying attention. But Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State are both making major gains on the ground there as the Americans and Saudis attack their enemies, the Houthis. Their only real opposition in the country.
Scott, you're telling me that Al-Qaeda still exists? I thought that the U.S. had defeated Al-Qaeda years ago.
You know what? That's true. They did. You know what? At the time that they killed bin Laden, Al-Qaeda virtually didn't really exist. And I don't mean to give the CIA credit, but they killed a lot of Al-Qaeda guys who'd been hiding out in Pakistan, and they weren't really getting replaced. And at the time they killed bin Laden, their movement was basically moribund. And then Obama went and took their side in Libya and Syria. And with that, just forget it, because he spread the war then to Mali, spread it down to Nigeria, redoubled all the intervention in Somalia. And then with the rise of the al-Nusra Front and the Islamic State in Syria and Iraq, you got a whole new generation of war guaranteed right there. You know, just in the last 4 years, at the time that Obama killed Osama, the caliphate was the attic where Osama was hiding from his wife in exile on the ass end of the planet Earth from here in Nowheresville, Pakistan. And Obama went and he makes George W. Bush look like a hero, what Obama did for Al-Qaeda in the Levant.
You know, Scott, after World War I, the American people realized they had made a mistake in supporting that intervention. And not all of them did, but plenty of Americans did support World War I. But afterward, you got to give Americans credit. They said this has been an abomination. we never are going to get involved in another European war. And that was why when World War II was happening, with the war between Britain and Germany and France, that Americans overwhelmingly said, we don't want any part of this, because we learned from the intervention in World War I. So they learned their lesson. When are people going to learn the lesson of interventionism here in the Middle East? There is not one success story over the last, well, since the Cold War, since 1990, not one single success story. It's all been a disaster, chaos, refugee crisis, death, destruction. I mean, when are Americans going to say, hey, this thing has turned out to be a disaster, instead of supporting all this stuff? It's phenomenal to me.
Just like always, I'm sorry, Bumper, this always happens, but back always to the horribleness of Rand Paul, who's taken the greatest opportunity that any human being, any single man has ever had to advance the ideas of peace and liberty, and he's completely blown it. He's completely wasted it. How hard would it be for him to just tell the story of post-Cold War foreign policy and why this is all the Bushes and the Clintons' fault? What a line. What a great line for 2016. This is all the Bushes and the Clintons' fault. Then he's running against the establishment candidate in his party, and he's equating him with her, the already coronated establishment candidate in the other party. Everything wrong in the world is the Bushes and the Clintons' fault. Vote Paul. What's wrong in the Middle East? It's the Bushes and the Clintons' fault. Bush Sr. wouldn't get the hell out of Saudi Arabia, neither would Clinton. Provoked the terrorist attacks, which Jr. then used as the excuse to make everything worse. And then when those guys went home, Obama took their side because he's the worst person in American history since Benedict Arnold, and made things that much worse. And now you want to hire Bushes and Clintons to reinvade Iraq again, to send your son back over there again, to liberate him again, to make everything that they made wrong right? You've got to be kidding me. Vote Paul 2016. How hard is that? It's not hard. And yet what does he do? Oh yeah, no, Iran is a terrible threat. Oh yeah, no, Israel, yeah, whatever they say. Oh yeah, Palestinians, hey, there's no such thing as a Palestinian.
Yeah, well,
it's not just a disgrace. It's the worst blown opportunity in the history of all of history to teach libertarianism.
Yeah, but that's the problem. The problem is
generically defined. The Liberty Movement, generically defined even. And instead he's running as Jeb and is losing to Jeb.
Yeah, but the problem is I think he really believes in what he's saying. I mean, he really does.
He's a horrible, horrible person. All he's got to do is read his father's articles. And if he thinks that he is better on his father than anything, even politics, he's a proven failure.
Well,
wrong.
He disagrees with his father on these things. I mean, that's a plain fact. And I think libertarians had their hopes up that he would be libertarian on foreign policy, but he's not. He's a conservative, and he always said he was a conservative. So, I mean, I don't hold him to any great standard that he's violated, because I don't think he ever led us into believing that he was a libertarian on foreign policy. He really believes like the rest of like Jeb Bush and like Hillary Clinton. He really believes like they do. And so he's standing up for what he believes. There is an interesting...
Except that he's got no excuse. We know that he has every opportunity in the world to know better, that he could know better. And in fact, I think it's clear that if he was a decent person at all, then he would agree with his father's anti-war articles 100%. Ron is awesome on all this stuff. Ron is not an ideologue, and Ron is educated on all this stuff. I've interviewed Ron Paul about Korea for 45 minutes, and he knows everything about it. You know, Rand isn't better than him on any of this stuff. How dare he pose like he is and throw this opportunity away? Now, Jeb Bush is just a son of a Bush. He is natural born worst person on the planet. So there's no reason to be disappointed in him. But you know what, Jacob? You're wrong that Rand never fooled anybody into believing in him, that he never posed as any kind of peacenik or anything. He was very happy to have his father's supporters believe that he was like his father, and even has told people numerous times, just wait, you know, I'm secretly pretending to be a bad guy, but just wait, because when I get more power, then I'll reveal the true wrong inside and this kind of thing. People have come to me over and over telling me that. Rand promised me that he's only faking like this and whatever. And there are thousands and maybe millions of Ron Paulians who believed in Rand, who did everything they could, you know, like he's a Star Wars prequel, right? Where they just want to love him so bad, they just can't accept how horrible he is. And so that's a real betrayal. It's not like he's just some other Bush. He's just John Kasich. He's the son of Ron Paul, goddammit. He has no excuse for being like this. It's absolutely disgusting. It's unforgivable. That's what it is.
I think I think what your point goes is to methodology. I mean, it goes to show you can't convert people. I mean, I have relatives that love me dearly that are not libertarians, and they've read some of my literature, and or they've avoided the literature, and it just goes to show me that you can't really just convert somebody that's dead set in a different direction. And Ron raised children, and I've seen it in families where libertarians. I have a friend who's hardcore libertarian. I saw him raise his kids from babyhood, and one grew up to be a libertarian, and the other one grew up to be a statist. And he says, Jacob, how did this happen? He says, I preached libertarianism the whole time to him. I don't know. Maybe it's in the genes. Maybe it's in the DNA. What explains why some of us have this breakthrough and others don't? But I don't think it necessarily means that a person is a bad person or anything like that. They just have a philosophical mindset that's different from us, Scott. And I that's what I say about Rand. He's a conservative. He's not a libertarian.
Yep.
Now, there is an interesting twist to this. It looks like Cruz, from what I read in the paper today, and I'm not defending the guy because certainly he's not somebody to be defended, but it looks like he's posturing himself to take some of the libertarian support away from Ron Paul. He came out and said that he supports keeping Assad in power, and he feels that, unless I misconstrue the article, he feels that it was a mistake to get rid of Saddam Hussein and Gaddafi and somebody else, I forget. Because of the chaos. He said we would have been better off leaving these dictators in power, and everybody would still be alive that were killed in the process of those regime change operations. That, to me, is an interesting posturing that Cruz seems to be making to distinguish himself from Bush, and I think to try to steal from some of the libertarian support from Rand Paul.
Yep. Well, and it also goes to show that no matter what Rand is horrible on, which is everything: Afghanistan, Pakistan, Yemen, Somalia, Syria, Iran, Israel. Did I say Iran already? No matter how horrible he is on everything, they still go, oh, I'm not an isolationist like him, right? Ted Cruz said, well, I'm all for killing people for the national interest. I just don't want to do anything in the name of helping anybody else. I don't want, which is, of course, always a lie that they mean to help anybody else, but that's what they call it. And so he's saying this is a fool's errand to try to bring democracy to Iraq or Libya or Syria. But don't get me wrong, because, you know, I'll blast the hell out of everybody. I'm a right-wing nationalist just like the rest of them. Not like that pansy, peacenik, isolationist Rand Paul, which, of course, isn't true, but it just goes to show that it might as well be. He might as well be good on this stuff and have a decent argument, because being as horrible as Sheldon Adelson wants him to be isn't helping at all.
Yeah, no, Cruz is definitely cut out of the same cloth. I mean, whoever you elect on the Republican side, you're talking about more killing, more bombing, more crises. Whoever you elect on the Democratic side, more killing, more bombing, more crises. This does not bode well for the American people.
Yep. No, it's horrible. And you know, I'm getting castigated a little bit here in the chat room.
Your microphone is going bad again. Real bad.
All right, here you go.
But we're about out of time anyway. All right, so I'll pick up the slack here. Yeah, I mean, there's nobody on the political sphere that really is going to move America in a good direction. I mean, this is not a good sign. But ideas matter. Ideas can shift the course of a society. That's what happened when America moved toward an interventionist, imperialist foreign policy. That was just ideas that influenced Americans of that time to say, hey, let's have an empire. Let's get involved in these foreign conflicts. Let's go over there and try to colonize these countries with military bases and so forth. If America could shift in the bad direction, America can shift in the good direction. And that's why we libertarians just need to keep plowing forward. Hey, you know, we've gone way over time, Scott. Hope you know
That's
that.
true. We got started late, but we stayed way late. So, all right. Thanks, everybody. And sorry, everybody, for yelling about Rand Paul so much. I just hate his guts. That's all. Hope he hits his knee really hard on something sharp. Good night. See you next Thursday.
Okay, Scott. Enjoy it.